The day my father died, my stepmother looked me in the eye and said, "You were never really part of this family." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stood there in the hallway of the house I grew up in, the house where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I burned my first batch of chocolate chip cookies in that kitchen, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. She had been waiting years to say that out loud. My father was Leonard Hargrove. Most people in Asheville, North Carolina knew him as the senior partner at Hargrove and Associates, one of the most respected estate law firms in the western part of the state. 41 years he practiced. He was the kind of man who wore the same brand of dress shoes his entire adult life, who kept a leather journal on his desk that he never let anyone read, who said "we'll see" when he meant yes and said nothing at all when he meant no. He was complicated in the way that very disciplined people often are, all the feeling locked somewhere deep underneath the structure. My mother died when I was 9. A car accident on I-26, a Tuesday morning in February. Black ice, the police report said. After that, it was just me and my father, and the house, and the way grief made him even more contained than he already was. We were close in the way two people can be close when they are the only ones left. Not always easy, not always warm, but there. He married my stepmother. I'll call her Renata, because that was her name. When I was 15. She came into our life with a wide smile and strong opinions and a habit of rearranging furniture. Within a year, she had repainted my mother's kitchen yellow. Within 2, she had packed up the photos my father kept on the bookshelf and replaced them with decorative objects she bought at an antique market in Biltmore Village. By the time I left for college at 18, the house felt like somewhere I had visited once, a long time ago. My father never said anything about any of it. I went to UNC Chapel Hill on a partial scholarship, studied accounting, then stayed for a master's in forensic accounting because my professor told me I had a mind for patterns and anomalies, and I believed her. I graduated with honors. I got a job at a mid-sized financial forensics firm in Charlotte. I was 26 and I was good at my work, and I told myself that was enough. I called my father every Sunday. Sometimes we talked for 40 minutes. Sometimes we talked for 8. He always asked about my work in that careful, formal way he had. "Are they treating you well there?" And I always said yes. He came to my apartment once for my birthday. Renata had a prior engagement. He brought me a card with $50 in it, and we ate Thai food and watched a documentary about national parks, and it was, in its quiet way, one of the best evenings I can remember. When he got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 3, diagnosed 14 months before he died, I drove to Asheville every other weekend. I sat with him. I made soup. I reorganized his medication schedule when I noticed the pharmacy had made an error that could have been serious. Renata was there, of course. Mostly she managed things from a distance, coordinating with the hospice team by phone, hosting her book club on Thursday evenings, maintaining the life she had built around my father without much visible disruption. She was civil to me during those months, cold, but civil. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that 3 months before my father died, she had convinced him to sign a revised version of his estate documents. I found this out later. I'm getting ahead of myself. He died on a Thursday morning in early October. I got the call from the hospice nurse at 6:47 a.m. I was already dressed for work. I sat down on my kitchen floor and stayed there for a while. The funeral was the following Monday. A private service, Renata had decided. Just close family and colleagues. I drove up Sunday night and stayed at a hotel off the highway because Renata had told me in a text message that she had out-of-town guests staying in the spare rooms. I didn't argue. I booked a room with a queen bed and a view of a parking garage, and I ironed my black dress in the morning, and I drove to the church. The church was my father's church, the one he'd attended for 30 years. Dark wood pews and tall windows and the smell of candle wax and old hymnals. I arrived 20 minutes early. I walked up the front steps and through the main doors, and I was halfway down the center aisle when my stepmother stepped out from a side door and planted herself directly in my path. She was wearing a black suit, perfectly fitted. Her hair was set. She looked like she had been preparing for this moment. "This is a family service," she said. Her voice was low, controlled. "Invitation only." I looked at her. He was my father. "And I am his wife." She tilted her head slightly. "There are seats at the back, near the door. For acquaintances, that's where you'll sit. I want to be clear about something. I am not a person who makes scenes. I was raised by a man who considered emotional restraint a form of respect. I have sat across from corporate fraudsters in deposition rooms and kept my voice perfectly level while they lied to my face. I do not yell. I do not cry in front of people I don't trust. I walked to the back of the church. I sat in the last pew, next to a woman I didn't recognize, and I watched my father's funeral from 40 feet away, and I did not make a sound. My stepbrother, Renata's son from her first marriage, a man named Griffin who sold commercial real estate and had never once made eye contact with me for more than 2 seconds, delivered one of the eulogies. He talked about my father's generosity and his vision and his commitment to family. My father's actual colleagues from the firm sat in the third and fourth rows, looking slightly confused. I kept my hands folded in my lap the entire time. Afterward, there was a reception at the house. I was not told about it directly. I overheard 2 women from the church talking about it on the steps. I drove to the house anyway. Renata met me at the door. "I think you've paid your respects," she said. "You don't need to come in." "His partners are inside," I said. "People I know. I'd like to speak to them." "Another time." She stepped forward slightly, filling the door frame, and behind her I could see the living room full of people holding glasses of wine, the yellow kitchen walls visible beyond, and on the mantel where my father's photograph had once sat, an elaborate floral arrangement in white and cream. That was when I heard the voice. "Is that Katherine?" I knew that voice. It belonged to a man named Warren Ellis, my father's oldest colleague. They had been law school roommates at Wake Forest 40 years ago. He appeared behind Renata's shoulder. A tall man in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that comes from decades of standing before judges. "Katherine Hargrove," he said again. He pushed gently past Renata and came to the door. He looked at me, then at the situation, and something shifted in his face. "Why are you standing outside?" "She was just leaving," Renata said smoothly. Warren Ellis looked at my stepmother for a long moment. Then he looked back at me. Then he turned and raised his voice slightly. Not loudly, just enough so that it carried back into the room. "Excuse me, everyone." The conversations inside quieted. "I want to make sure you've all had a chance to say hello to Katherine, Leonard's daughter, the forensic accountant." He said it the way you'd announce someone at a reception, warm and matter-of-fact. "She's the one who caught the billing error at the Mecklenburg County project that would have cost the firm $200,000. Leonard told that story every year at the partners' dinner. I had not known he told that story. The room had gone quiet. My father's partners were looking toward the door. 2 of them started walking over. Renata had not moved, but her expression had changed. Just slightly, just at the edges. Warren Ellis stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, Katherine." I came in. What followed was 2 hours of conversations I had not expected to have. My father's partners talked to me about cases they'd worked on with him, about his habits, about the way he'd always kept a photograph of me on the corner of his desk, a fact I had not known, because I had never been invited to his office in the years after Renata came into his life. One of the junior partners, a woman named Teresa, pulled me aside near the kitchen and said quietly, "He talked about you all the time. He was very proud." I thanked her. I kept my voice steady. I left before Renata had a chance to ask me to. The estate meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. This was standard. My father's firm would handle the reading of the will, and the executor, Warren Ellis, had called to confirm my attendance. I dressed carefully that morning. Gray blazer, dark slacks. I had slept 4 hours. I drove to Asheville on autopilot, running numbers in my head without meaning to, the way I always do when I'm anxious. The conference room was on the 4th floor of my father's building. I had never been inside it before. It was very much what you'd expect. Long table, leather chairs, framed prints of mountain landscapes on the walls. Renata was already there when I arrived, seated at one end, Griffin beside her. They had a shared attorney with them, a man I didn't recognize. Renata did not look at me when I entered. Warren Ellis was at the head of the table. He had brought another attorney from the firm, a younger woman named Deb, who kept a yellow legal pad in front of her. "We have a complication," Warren said, before anyone had fully settled. He said it plainly, the way my father used to say things, without dramatic preamble. "There are 2 documents. The will Leonard filed with this office in 2019, and a revised document signed in July of this year. Renata's attorney shifted in his chair. The 2019 document, Warren continued, divides the estate between Katherine and Renata, with the firm's equity stake designated for a trust to continue funding Leonard's pro bono practice. He set his glasses on the table. The July document leaves the estate, including the firm's equity stake, entirely to Renata. The room was quiet. "We have concerns about the July document," Warren said. That was when I opened the folder I had brought with me. "I want to explain something about what I do for work. Forensic accounting is not glamorous. It is not dramatic. It is the careful, methodical examination of numbers and documents and patterns over time, looking for the thing that doesn't fit. I've been doing it for 7 years. And when Warren Ellis had called me 2 weeks ago to tell me about the July document, something had gone very still in my chest. The same stillness I feel right before I find what I'm looking for. I had asked Warren to send me everything: bank records, firm financials, the July document itself, correspondence from the months before my father died. I had spent 11 days going through it. The signature on the July document has 3 characteristics inconsistent with my father's signature as documented across 41 years of legal filings," I said. I slid copies across the table. The pen pressure is heavier in the ascenders than in any of his authenticated signatures. The capital L in his name has a loop he abandoned in 1987. It doesn't appear in any document after that year, but it appears here. And the angle of the baseline is off by approximately 6 degrees from his consistent norm. Renata's attorney looked at the pages. He said nothing. "I also found a series of wire transfers from my father's personal account, beginning in April of this year," I continued. "During the period when he was on high-dose pain medication and receiving daily hospice care, 11 transfers over 9 weeks totaling $340,000 to an account belonging to a holding company registered in Delaware. The holding company's registered agent is Griffin Talbert." I looked at her son when I said it. He had gone the color of old paper. Warren Ellis did not look surprised. He had seen some of this already. He had known enough to ask for a handwriting consultant before the meeting, as it turned out. What I had brought was a financial piece, the part he didn't have. Renata stood up. "This is a fabrication," she said. "This is harassment. My husband was of sound mind. He was on 60 milligrams of oxycodone daily in July," I said. "His hospice records, which I have obtained, document significant cognitive fluctuation during that period. His attending physician noted on July 14, 11 days before the date on that document, that he was, and I'm quoting directly from the medical record, not consistently oriented to time or place." The room was very quiet. Renata sat back down. "What happened in the months after that meeting was not quick. These things never are. There were attorneys, and there were court filings, and there was a handwriting expert hired by the estate whose conclusions matched mine, and a financial forensics review by an outside firm that confirmed the wire transfer pattern. Griffin retained his own lawyer. Renata retained a second one. I kept going to work. I kept calling the hotel in Asheville, where I was staying for those months, a temporary arrangement. I ran 5 miles every morning before the sun came up, on a greenway trail along the river, because it was the 1 hour of the day when my brain stopped processing. My father's original 2019 will was upheld. The July document was ruled invalid. The estate, including his equity stake in the firm, was distributed as he had actually intended. Griffin Talbert reached a civil settlement. I am not permitted to disclose the terms. On the day the ruling came through, Warren Ellis called me. He said my father had left something with him years ago, to be given to me after his death. He hadn't known until that week, when he found it in my father's file. It was a sealed envelope. Inside was a single page in my father's handwriting. Precise, controlled, the capital letters slightly angular, in that specific way I had looked at so many times in those 11 days. It said in part, "I am sorry I was not always brave enough to say the right things out loud. You are always the best of what your mother and I made together. I see her in you when you are quiet and absolutely certain. I hope you know that I know exactly who you are." I sat in my car in the parking garage of Warren Ellis's building and I read it 4 times. Then I folded it carefully along its original crease and put it back in the envelope, and I allowed myself, finally, to cry. I am 31 years old. I own a small house now in a neighborhood in Charlotte with oak trees that lose their leaves all at once in November and are bare for months before anything comes back. I drive the same car I've driven since graduate school. I make good money. I have a plant on my kitchen windowsill that I have somehow kept alive for 3 years, which feels like an achievement proportionate to anything else I've done. My father's name is still on the door of the firm. Warren Ellis made sure of that. I think about what my father wrote sometimes. The part about being quiet and absolutely certain. That is not always an easy thing to be. People mistake stillness for weakness, for absence, for not caring. They look at a woman who doesn't argue back, and they think she has conceded. They are usually wrong about that. The day Renata told me I was never really part of the family, she was standing in the hallway of a house that my father spent his whole life building. She thought she was taking something from me. What she didn't understand. What she couldn't have seen. Looking at me standing there in that hallway in my black dress with my hands folded and my face completely still, was that I already had everything he had ever actually given me. The rest was just paperwork, and paperwork is what I do. I still have that envelope in the top drawer of my desk. I don't open it often. But sometimes, on mornings when a case isn't going the way it should, or when I'm sitting in a deposition room across from someone who thinks I don't see what they're doing, I think about my father's handwriting, that precise, controlled slant, the way he wrote my name. What happens in my family, the forged document, the wire transfers, the slow, careful dismantling of everything my father actually intended, didn't happen because anyone was extraordinarily clever. It happened because they assumed I wouldn't look. They saw a woman who had been kept at the edges of that family for 15 years, and they concluded that she had accepted her place there, that she would stay quiet and stay small and let things proceed the way they had arranged them. That assumption was their mistake, and it was a mistake they made because they confused silence with surrender. I've thought a lot about what actually got me through those 11 days of going through records at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning. It wasn't anger. Anger burns fast and makes you sloppy. What I had was something quieter than that, a sense of obligation to what was actually true. My father signed a document in 2019 when he was clear-headed and deliberate, the way he was about everything, and that document reflected what he actually wanted. The July document did not. The numbers told me that. The signature told me that. My job was simply to make the record reflect what was real. That's the thing about integrity. And I mean it in the plainest sense, not as an abstraction. It's mostly just a commitment to accuracy, to not letting the false version stand when you have the ability to correct it. Renata and Griffin were counting on the fact that most people don't have that ability or don't use it when it's inconvenient. They were right about most people. They were wrong about me. I also think about what my father gave me that had nothing to do with the estate. He gave me a way of thinking. He spent 41 years in a profession where the document is everything, where the precise word in the precise place is the difference between what holds and what doesn't. He raised me inside that framework, even when he couldn't say the right things out loud. The discipline I brought to those 11 days, the patience to go line by line through a decade of financial records, that came from him, from watching him, from understanding somewhere early that careful work done without fanfare is still work that matters. And then there's the part that is harder to name, the part that kept me driving to Asheville every other weekend when my father was sick, even when Renata made it clear I wasn't wanted. The part that had me sitting in the back pew of that church instead of walking away. The refusal to stop, not out of stubbornness, out of something more like faith in the eventual weight of the truth. Things that are real tend to remain real if you don't abandon them. I didn't abandon what I knew about my father. I didn't abandon what I knew about my father. I didn't abandon what I knew about myself. The rest, as it turned out, was just paperwork. And paperwork, as I told my father's partners the afternoon the ruling came through, is what I do.